The camera's rolling.
Okay.
If you could just start by telling me your name and
Okay.
what it is that you do, having to do with the healthy workplace law.
Okay. My name is Deb Falzoi. I am one of the Massachusetts co-coordinators for the Healthy Workplace Bill, and my focus is on building awareness for the bill. I do that through social media, blogging, basically trying to get advocates together to create some buzz around this bill and even educate people on what workplace bullying even is. There's a lot of people don't know what workplace bullying is. So part of my job is to educate people about what it is, and then for a lot of people, once they understand what it is, then they can come out of isolation and then decide at their own pace whether, when it's time to support the bill, and then do things like flyering or plan events or I don't know.
No, that's great.
I might have to redo some of this.
It's all right. We'll be editing it. It's not a problem. You must have a really good understanding of how we've gotten to where we are, the history of this bill, because you've been involved. How long have you been involved, and what do you know about how it's gotten from, this is now, I guess, the third time it's in process. If you could just kind of touch some of those historic.
Mm-hmm. So at the point that I got involved, it was about 5 years ago, and I had actually been bullied on the job, and I really didn't understand why the bullying behavior was legal. So when I got on board, I did some research, found David Yamada, who had at that point written the legislation, and it had been introduced, I believe, once in the State House, but there wasn't really a backing behind the bill in terms of advocacy and awareness building. So at that point, he got a group together, including myself, Greg Sorzin, and a bunch of other people. And at that point, we introduced the bill in the State House mid-session, so each session's two years. And from then, we just sort of, it kept snowballing. We started off with, at that point, I believe we just had one sponsor of the bill. And then each session, so it's been in 3 full sessions, and the first full session, we had 13 co-sponsors. The last full session, we had about 39, and this full session we've had, I believe it's 58. So we can attribute that to the awareness that's been built across the state and getting advocates to contact their legislators when we need them to at the beginning of the session. And then during the session, as we keep building awareness, that adds more people to our contact lists who we can contact in the next session to ask for co-sponsorship. So it's really grown pretty tremendously. At the beginning, when it was just that small group of people about 5 years ago, we've now grown to about 5,000 contacts who we can, through Facebook, or we have an online petition and an email list, and we can contact those people at key points in the legislative process to get those people to contact their legislators. And then some people are sort of like myself, and they come forward and want to do more and, come up with an idea and roll with it, and that it all sort of snowballs. So.
Great. Yeah, it seems that it's become, I guess, it's beginning to become a national type of a movement, would you say? I mean, there seems to be legislation like this in, 26?
Something like that, yeah.
Many others, most of the, more than half of the states.
Yeah.
Do you have any experience with that? Are you ever in contact with people or groups outside of Massachusetts that are doing the same type of work?
Well, so about every quarter, I believe, Gary Namey, who runs the Workplace Bullying Institute, has a conference call, and we're able to talk to the other co-coordinators across the country and find out what obstacles they're facing. We can share ideas. A lot of it is specific to their legislative process, which isn't necessarily similar to the way it is in Massachusetts. So, but the other co-coordinators will talk about what challenges they're facing. A lot of it involves the legislators in their state and, trying to get past certain points of the process. So, but it does feel really good to hear other people across the state and across the country, and know that we're part of a movement and it's not just what's going on here in Massachusetts. New York, for example, has a really strong advocacy group, and it can be inspiring to hear what's going on in other states.
So you were talking about the what it's like to feel as if you're part of a national. Could you talk a little bit more about that? That was pretty interesting.
I'm trying to think what else I can say about that.
Do you feel it must be supportive of the work that you're doing in Massachusetts? I would suspect to know that there are other people doing the same types of things in other states.
Yeah, any connection that we get, whether it be in other states or even in Massachusetts, there's a lot of validation that happens, or connections that people are able to make. So the more stories that I personally hear and other people's insights, it just really becomes validating to my own personal experience. And then we can make connections that we can then write about and validate other people's experiences. Nationally, I'm trying to think. It's hard to say because Massachusetts is on such like the forefront of the whole movement. So I feel like we've definitely come further in our progress. And if anything, we're probably inspiring the other states. But it is inspiring to hear, I'm trying to think. As an example, a coordinator from another state was just starting out, and it feels really great to provide them with resources because we've already gone through it. We have a website, we have things that have worked here in Massachusetts, so we can pass along ideas and share national stories and basically share resources that give the movement more traction across the country.
And you were saying you're an important resource for people to talk about their stories. And you also mentioned that you had been in a situation yourself. Are you comfortable talking about your own?
Sure.
Please let me know what was your own experience.
So I worked at a university in Boston, and there was some sabotage happening in terms of I worked on a website at the school, and one of the higher-ups in the school, spent a lot of time undermining my work and taking work from me rather than actually addressing any issues that she had directly. A lot of it was underhanded moves in terms of creating a committee that didn't necessarily have the experience to be overseeing a website. And then as I was responsive to her direction, the bullying escalated in terms of bad-mouthing, in terms of trying to shift work over to other people. And at that point, after I spoke up, I got retaliated against. There was a written warning given to me with fabricated grounds for the warning. And even though I didn't think that that whole situation was fair, what shocked me more is that as I went, through channels that would sort of make sense to go through, so going to the head dean of the school, and then going to human resources, eventually going to the provost's office before I left, at every turn, I pretty much got blown off. And the crazier part of the story is that many people went to report this person. So eventually I heard after I left that this person was laid off. But the problem is that a lot of employers don't actually address the actual issue. They sort of try to put a Band-Aid on people that would be responsive to being managed and not the actual problem, which is the bully. And having done a lot of work with workplace bullying, I've since observed patterns, and other people have observed patterns where someone who has authority, like a boss, will often bully because they're insecure. Recently I heard somebody say that someone with a low level of competence will target somebody with a high level of competence, and they'll also happen to have low morals, and their target will have high morals. And trying to find these sort of common threads through people's stories really helps to validate my experience. And as I'm learning more about things, I'd like to shift a lot of the conversation more to the bully personality instead of just the target, which has been a lot of the focus, but making the discussion a lot about how we can, respond to bullying personalities, and sort of seeing it more as focusing on that as the issue rather than what the targets might be doing that would be prompting this sort of bullying response. So.
Because it seems right now that not only is all of the responsibility put on the target to deal with this, but also it seems that there's a lot of blame pointed at the target as well.
Yeah, I think that the bully would love to, the people in the power write the rules to keep themselves in power. So they're going to, just like a bully would bully their subordinate, they're going to frame the story so that the target looks like the bad person, and sort of mimic what's actually happening in the workplace, which is to put the blame on the bully put the blame on the target, and I don't know where I was going.
Yeah, and interesting. It was interesting too that you brought up and talked about. If you could talk a little bit more about how one could get the focus on the bully, and what does that mean, and do we need to understand the bully, or I'm kind of lost in terms of how to deal with the bullies.
I think that there should, as we get workplace bullying to be a household term, just like domestic, so it sort of mimics domestic violence in terms of, you have the bully and the target in the day-to-day demeaning of the target. And rather than simply focusing on, say, a target of domestic violence, think the conversation from a mental health perspective and creating research. That conversation should be shifted more to the bully and why they bully, what their what their childhoods may have been like, or what their motivations are, how to stop it, sort of just like you would any other unacceptable behavior, like someone who's a domestic abuser or even a criminal, just trying to get an understanding of how their minds work so that the behavior can be recognized, but also it can be looked at as the part of the equation that isn't right and isn't fair and isn't just.
You mentioned that you hear a lot of stories from targets. One of the aspects that I run into is that I don't think a lot of people really, one, understand what bullying is to begin with, but two, they certainly don't understand the depth and the severity of what bullying is in the workplace. A lot of times people think it's just a grumpy boss, a bad day. We're talking about something different, I assume. So just given what you've heard and what you know, how would you describe, if you can give me some sense of how bad this is for people, what it's like?
I heard a psychologist who spoke with workplace bullying targets describe it as a target getting bit by a dog, and then that dog sitting in the corner of the room every day, day after day, just sort of lurking there and feeling or causing the target to feel threatened, but not, how do I describe it? The basic idea is that the target has to sit there in fear of the next move of the bully, because it's not just a bad day at the office, it's an ongoing series of threatening behavior, sabotage, yelling, just ongoing demeaning behavior that gets, after a while, at the health of the target. They can suffer from depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, all sorts of physical symptoms that go along with being beaten down day after day, general abuse.
And I've heard some stories of that it seems that these bullies do things that are not what no one would even think of as being part of a business relationship. Calling people at home at late hours and to yell at them without giving up any confidentiality. Can you share anything, any ideas, stories that you've heard, or bits and pieces that would add some more detail to things like that? Have you heard stories like that as well?
Yeah, a lot of the stories that I hear are more just creating more of a hostile environment. So continuously taking credit for somebody's work, or there's a lot of manipulation that I've heard about. So, sort of creating these lose-lose situations for employees and backing them into a corner so that they can't succeed and they can't thrive. And it's really almost punishing the target for being successful and competent. I'm trying to think. I've heard like of an example of a teacher questioning some of the immoral, habits of her superior, and the more she did that, and the more she was focused on the success of her students, the more she was isolated from other teachers, excluded from meetings, basically told, it was okay for her to not follow certain directions, and then I believe, then getting reprimanded for the same exact thing she was told that she could do. So I feel there's a lot of like entrapment or I'm trying to think of other stories.
But again, too, we're not talking about isolated incidents. We're talking about repetitive actions over and over.
Right, yeah. So these are things that are happening over time. It's not just one story where somebody, made one immoral decision. It's sort of an ongoing or a repeated series of bad decisions that are at the expense of the target. I've heard another situation of a successful saleswoman who managed a whole series of, I can't speak.
No, you're doing great.
I've heard of another story of a saleswoman who managed an entire staff of salespeople, and a new boss was brought in, and it was very clear early on that that boss was set on getting rid of the current staff and replacing them with people she knew. So she just did whatever she could, made up things. Despite this person having, still great sales figures, the boss still found a way to manipulate the situation to make this person look bad. I don't remember actually the details of it, but ultimately this person, her health was harmed and she had to quit to save her health. It just became too stressful to deal with. So.
When you think about your own situation that you had to go through, how does it leave you? Did it leave you angry? Did it leave you upset? Did it leave you hurt? What were the emotions that you were feeling as you were in that situation?
I felt mostly angry. I felt like, how can somebody hear my story and not want to step in and make it right? I mostly felt like it was really unfair for the person, for my boss. Actually, she wasn't even my boss, but for the bully to have gotten away with what she did. It doesn't. Well, the other emotion I really felt was shock, because it doesn't help a business or an organization to have a bully on staff. They're not really spending their focus on producing and helping the bottom line or benefiting the organization. They're spending most of their time figuring out how they can really sort of care about their own ego and point the finger at other people in order to make themselves look better. So yeah, so most of my emotions were centered around anger and shock, that, disbelief that no one was doing anything about it. It wasn't so much hurt. Yeah, I'd say mostly anger.
It seems that from what I've seen, some of these targets are really virtually left to not even be able to work or pursue a career anymore. Have you heard any stories like that, or do you know of any stories like that?
I've heard of people having to take pretty long leaves of absence to deal with their health after being bullied. Some people who have thought about suicide, especially early on in the movement, or since my involvement, where you couldn't go online and as easily find out what workplace bullying is. And then once they've found out about it, they feel more validated and feel less isolated. But until they get to that point, I've heard of people having to leave their jobs, and then they're stuck in a different kind of stressful situation because they don't have an income. So yeah.
And another aspect of bullying is mobbing. Could you talk a little bit about what that is, what that looks like?
Trying to figure out how to exactly define.
Yeah, no, that's, or if you've heard of any stories that would illustrate mobbing.
I haven't really heard of too many specific stories about mobbing. So mobbing would be sort of the ganging up mentality where somebody isn't being bullied by just one person. Or maybe it starts out as just one person, but that person starts to get other people against the target, and all of a sudden you have this mob mentality of the target having a bunch of people against them. I haven't really heard of those types of stories. I've heard of situations where somebody might have a supervisor and another supervisor sort of gang up on them. I'm trying to think of specific stories. I can't really come up with something.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Who, you mentioned David, you mentioned Gary Mamie, who have you been working with, or who could you could repeat what you said if you want to, but who do you think are really the people who are at the forefront of this movement?
Well, David Yamada has written the legislation, and he is speaking all the time at different conferences around the world about workplace bullying. And then there's, at least in Massachusetts, Greg Sorzin, who heads up a union chapter, whose lobbyists are in the State House lobbying for the bills that they want to pass in their union. So with that, with the three of us, we have a great setup where David can talk about, the legal perspective, and then Greg can, working with his lobbyists. Oh my God, I can't.
You're doing great.
Greg, working with his lobbyists, can alert me when, we need a certain push in the State House. So if they feel like, the Republicans are blocking the bill from moving forward, we can give a big push to a certain group of them. So the first step of the process has always been to go through the Joint Committee on Labor and Workforce Development. And every time we've testified at their hearing, we then give a big push to the committee members to pass the bill to the next step in a quick manner, so that, we're not waiting till the end of the session to let it sort of just stall and fade out. So we've got a good system going with that in terms of covering our bases, really, and communicating what needs to be done and when, and then activating the whole population of advocates that we have to then contact their legislators. Recently, because of the pushes that the advocates have given, we've heard that, a buzz has been generated in the State House about the bill. So, it's good to get that feedback and to pass that along to the advocates, to get them energized, to then tell people about it, to get more of a buzz. So it's kind of this circular process, I guess, to get the bill pushed.
Great.
So.
And when is this legislative? When is this over? When would it be too late, right? If it doesn't get voted on this time?
So each legislative each legislative session is 2 years, and it starts in January. So we've had a full year in 2015, and then when we say it's 2 years, it actually ends in the summer of the following year. So we have about 6 months left of this session to get the bill passed, which we're hoping is enough time. We've been in this place before 2 sessions ago where, which is the furthest we've been. We're up for a third reading in the House. And at this point, 2 sessions ago, we didn't have enough time in the session to let it get anywhere, but we're hoping that 6 months is ample time to get it passed.
So if, for whatever reason, it doesn't pass this time around, then you have to wait till January to resubmit it or
Yep, and then we start the following January, so January of 2017, we would start basically at square one in terms of, or step one in terms of the process. We would have to, submit the bill again, wait for a bill number, get co-sponsors, and then start with the process again. So testify at the Joint Committee on Labor and Workforce Development hearing, and then wait for them to push it through to the next step, which is going in front of the House.
We're almost done. You're doing great.
Okay.
Give you a heads up that I know it's getting late, and at the end of the day, I appreciate.
Yeah.
It seems that we don't hear much from people who are against this bill. I mean, out in the open, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know? Do you hear anything from anyone, or have any contact with opponents to this, or do you know anything about why people might be opposed to this?
Well, in one of the earlier sessions, the Associated Industries of Massachusetts came up against the bill at the hearing, and they argued that it was enough to just train employers on workplace bullying, and that was basically enough. But they didn't factor in the idea that there needs to be accountability. I mean, really, the purpose of their organization is to back small businesses. That's who they serve. And they don't want more regulation on small businesses. But that opposition was all I've really heard. I know that the chambers of commerce are against the bill for the same reason, that that they're there to support business, and they don't want something in place to make businesses more liable. But what the piece of that I don't ever hear about from the business side is that it will actually help their bottom line to not have a bully on staff. We have numbers to back that idea up, that, from absenteeism rates to the cost of turnover, it really just hits the bottom line of a business to not get rid of a bully, or at least to not address it and try to correct the behavior and set out what the expectations are, and not allow it to happen.
But nobody's really come out being pro-bully, I would assume.
Yeah, I don't have any insight as to what is actually going on in the State House. I have heard, and I don't know if this is appropriate to say, but I have heard that one legislator said that the only way she can get work done is to bully. That, but I don't know if that's probably off the record.
No, from watching the testimony and from things that I've seen, this is not something that's limited to only one industry or one type of business. Has that been your experience as well? Have you heard from people, or could you talk about people from different walks of life who've experienced this?
Yeah, I mean, it cuts through every type of industry. There's not an industry that I've heard that is exempt from workplace bullying patterns. I have heard that the industries with the highest incidences of bullying are nonprofits, healthcare, and education, so K through 12 education and higher ed. I'm not quite sure why that is. I'm trying to think. I originally thought that it was strange that those are more of like the caring industries, but then they're also pretty female dominated industries. So I don't know if there's a connection there because women are more likely to be bullied than men. I was going to say something else about all this.
Different industries, different types of, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
Because I know with the testimony, there was someone who worked at a small, like a 15-person welding shop. There was a teacher. There were people that seemed to cover a pretty wide spectrum of jobs.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. And I haven't heard any data to support this, but from my own personal experience, I hear a lot of government workers say that they're bullied, and that going, coupled with higher ed and K through 12 education, one of my guesses is that if you work for an institution where you don't have to answer to a bottom line and your effectiveness is less relevant than someone's effectiveness at a business might be, then you might be more likely to get away with bullying because what you produce isn't as relevant, I guess, as
it's not as under such a critical eye.
Yeah. I feel like I was going to say something else too.
Well, is there something that you haven't really gotten to that you'd like to say? I mean, the camera is yours. You can say anything that you want right now on the topic, or in terms of raising awareness or anything that you want to say. This is the platform is yours.
One thing that I was struck by, I just read this book called Tribes by Seth Godin that David Yamada had blogged about. And I was really impressed with what he talked about in terms of people carving out a path for their lives, basically. So if someone was in a situation where they felt like they were in survival mode, and this doesn't exactly apply to a situation, on the one hand, we're saying to people that they can't just quit their jobs necessarily because they have food and shelter to worry about. But at the same time, what a political movement of any kind really gets to is the fact that if you want to create change, you can, and you don't have to wait for somebody else to carve a path for you. You can sort of bring what you can to the movement depending on your skill set or your interest at any level. So it doesn't have to be, overseeing all of the activity going on in an entire state. It can be, if you're an artist, finding some creative way to bring awareness to workplace bullying, or if you're an event planner, coming up with some sort of event and running with it. So I was just really struck in the book by the idea of empowering people, or the idea that people should feel empowered to make change, and they shouldn't let themselves just be at the mercy of what is here and now. They should, the whole idea of leading at any level of the movement is to create change and to improve things and to, have an impact. So.
That's terrific. Anything you feel that we didn't cover, or is there anything that's on your mind, or anything that you wanted to say when you came in here that we didn't get to?
I don't think so. Just no. I
Okay.
mean, yeah. I think that's about it.
Okay.